Hello and welcome back to Mystery of Israel Radio, where we're continuing our theme of the centrality of Jerusalem in the purposes of God for the end of the age. Last week we were talking about Psalm 2, which asks the question, why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth and the rulers take their stand together against the Lord and against his anointed, or against his Messiah. So anyway, I'd like to turn to the book of Joel today, maybe chapter 2, and we'll just read a little bit there, with again the theme of the nations of the earth coming against the Lord. The timing of it, which is called by the prophets the day of the Lord, and the seriousness of it. Before I turn to Joel, I want to just read a couple verses out of the prophet Haggai. Chapter 2, verse 6 says, "This is what the Lord of hosts says, in a little while I will once more shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land. I will shake all nations, and the desired of all nations will come, and I will fill this house with glory, says the Lord Almighty." Shake all nations. So if you were in Joel, let's go to chapter 2, where it says, "Blow ye the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble. For the day of the Lord cometh, for it is nigh at hand. A day of darkness and of gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness. As the morning spread upon the mountains, a great people and a strong," or another version says, "a large and mighty army comes, such as never was of old, nor ever will be in ages to come. Before them fire devours, behind them a flame blazes. Before them the land is like the Garden of Eden, behind them a desert waste. Nothing escapes them." I'm going to skip on down to verse 11. "The Lord thunders at the head of his army. His forces are beyond number, and mighty are those who obey his command. The day of the Lord is great. It is dreadful. Who can endure it? Therefore also now saith the Lord, turn you even to me with all your heart, and with fasting, and with weeping, and with mourning. Rend your heart, not your garments, and turn unto the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and of great kindness, and he relents from sending calamity. Who knows? He may turn and have pity and leave behind a blessing." Verse 17, "Let the priests, the ministers of the Lord, weep between the porch and the altar, and let them say, Spare thy people, O Lord, and give not thine heritage to reproach, that the heathen should rule over them. Why should they say among the people, Where is their God? Then the Lord will be jealous for his land and pity his people." When will the Lord be jealous for his land and pity his people? When the cry goes up from the priests and the ministers of the Lord to spare thy people, O Lord, and give not thine inheritance over to reproach, that the nations should rule over them. Why should they say, Where is their God? So it goes on later in the chapter. Verse 31, it says, "The sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord has said, and in the remnant whom the Lord shall call." Chapter 3, verse 1, the next verse. "For behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations, and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they, the nations, have scattered among the nations and parted or divided my land." Did you notice here that the day of the Lord is again focused on Judah and Jerusalem, and how the nations deal with Judah and Jerusalem? Did you notice in Haggai where it said the desire of nations shall come? This is the return of the Lord. And immediately before the return of the Lord is a time of trouble like no other time. Just like we read a number of weeks back in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 6 and 7. "Ask and see, can a man bear children? Then why do I see every strong man with his hands on his loins, like a woman in labor, every face turned deathly pale? How awful that day will be! None will be like it. It will be a time of trouble for Jacob, but he will be saved out of it." Jacob will be brought to a place of crying out to the Lord for deliverance, for salvation. Jacob will be brought to a place, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago in Hosea chapter 5. "I will go and return to my place, says the Lord, until they acknowledge their offense." The culmination of the age is around sifting Israel, even using the nations to sift Israel, to bring them to that place of weakness, to that place of crying out to the Lord for help, to the place of acknowledging their offense against the Lord in calling for the death of Jesus. But then he's going to hold accountable those same nations that came and divided Jerusalem, those nations that came against Israel. This Jerusalem question among the nations is really at its heart the Jesus question. Do you have the character and nature of God's Messiah written in your heart? Does your nation have the character of Jesus as its character? The Lord is shaking everything that can be shaken. Not only for nations, but for individuals. Maybe you're being shaken right now in advance of that day. Maybe the day of the Lord has come for you. Can you hear the voice of the Lord through it? He's calling you to turn to Him. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Of course the Lord is interested in you. Of course the Lord is interested in individuals. But this drama is being played out for the entire world at the end of the age, for all to see. He's determined to bring his church, the Gentile church, into the full measure of the stature of Christ, of Israel's Messiah. He's weaning us from being focused on ourselves and focused on what he can do for us. He's making us more concerned about his purposes and his glory than we are about our own selves. The book of Revelation, chapter 7, verse 9 says, "After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and in front of the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands, and they cried out in a loud voice, 'Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb.'" In verse 12 it says, "Then one of the elders asked me, 'These in white robes, who are they, and where did they come from?' And I answered, 'Sir, you know.' And he said, 'These are they who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb.'" Revelation 12:11 says, "And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death." He made them willing. Like Psalm 110 says, "Thy people shall be willing in the day of his power." He's constraining us. He's bringing us to a place that we really, in our flesh, do not want to go. Like he told Peter, when you're young, you'll go where you want to go. But when you're old, one will gird you and take you where you do not want to go. We as a church have been like blinded Samson. Our eyes have been drawn astray by the lusts of our heart. We've been attracted to the things of this world. But our eyes have been poked out and we're blind. And yet in our humiliation, in our blindness, as we cry out to the Lord, the strength of the Lord returns to his people and will be for him and will be for his ancient people, those Israelites whom he's sifting. We will be for them a help. We will swallow up the flood that's come out against them and preserve some, the chosen who will become the all. He's sifting out of all nations, and he's sifting out of Israel those who will not yield to him, those who hate the sacrifice that God has made on their behalf. Can you hear him speaking today? He's speaking. He's calling his people. I'm Tom Quinlan. We'll see you next time.